Some older gamers among you may be familiar with a game named Shantae. This lesser-known game, developed by WayForward Technologies and which was their first game based on an original property, came out in 2002 for the Game Boy Color, which is part of the reason why it's so obscure. By that time, the Game Boy Advance had come out and the Game Boy Color was slowly phasing out. It's no surprise, therefore, that Shantae sold very poorly, selling only about 25,000 copies. To this day, an original cartridge remains a collector's item, selling for up to thousands of US dollars a piece. After a few attempts to make a sequel, Shantae eventually was resurrected in 2010 and began her new series, starting with Shantae Risky's Revenge and continuing with Shantae and the Pirate's Curse. In this video, I'll be reviewing both of these, as well as comparing a few similarities and differences between the different versions available for different platforms. The first game I'll be reviewing is Shantae Risky's Revenge. Originally released in the USA in 2010 and in Europe in 2011 for the Nintendo DSi's DSiWare range, and was later re-released on iOS and later Windows, Wii U and PlayStation 4 as a Director's Cut version. For the majority of this review, I'll be talking about the original DSiWare version. The game's a sequel to the 2002 Game Boy Color game and follows the adventures of Shantae, a half-genie who is the guardian of a small port town known as Scuttletown. During an archaeological convention at which her uncle Mimic is, accidentally, displaying a lamp which he discovered, the first game's antagonist Risky Boots, a pirate with a penchant for all things shiny, crashes in and steals it, intent on using it alongside 3 magic seals for nefarious, unknown purposes. Shantae thus sets out to find the magic seals first and put an end to Risky's evil plan. For the first 3 quarters of the game, the plot is a little thin, though it thickens up nicely near the end of the game with not one but 2 pretty interesting twists which I shall not reveal because spoilers. The plot aside, the gameplay, characters and dialogue are where this game really shines. The game's a Metroidvania which sees you, as Shantae, exploring Sequinland high and low to find the magic seals and accomplish various other objectives along the way. On occasion it does suffer from the typical Metroidvania problem of not giving you many clues on what exactly it is you're supposed to be doing, and if you quit the game and restart much later, it can be difficult to remember exactly what your current objective was because the game doesn't explicitly tell you. That said though, the game does offer a hint system of sorts to at least shuffle you in the right direction. Also present is a standard item system allowing you to unlock various different spells and abilities using gems, the game's currency, and magic jam, which can be found in chests throughout the levels and is very limited in amounts. The spells you unlock draw from the mana bar in the top left when used, and in some cases can be turned on and off at will. One thing which really sets this game apart from the crowd is the dance mechanic. This allows Shantae to transform into one of 3 animal forms in order to traverse different terrains and hazards. The different forms are unlocked as you progress through the game, and while there are only 3 of them, they are put to very good use, and all 3 of them have an unlockable extra ability as well. This is quite a cool feature, allowing you to take on different forms to tackle different puzzles and situations as the game goes on, although it does sometimes get a bit annoying having to wait for Shantae to do the specific dance corresponding to the transformation you want. The game also makes quite good use of the touchscreen in that you can use it to manage your inventory and bring up the map screen, allowing you to see where you're going more easily and switch between items on the fly as you play. Now I'd like to talk about the characters. To simply describe the game's characters as good would be an understatement of the most massive variety. Each and every main character has a unique, distinctive design and enjoyable personalities to the extent that all of them, even the main villain Risky Boots, are likeable in some way or another. In fact, the eponymous Shantae might just be one of the most likeable characters I've ever encountered, if not the most likeable playable character. She's always peppy and determined, though sometimes clumsy, stubborn and forgetful on occasion. Also, she defeats enemies by whipping them with her hair. Willow Smith ate your heart out. But even aside from that, all the side characters and bosses also have their own unique designs and personalities. Even the NPCs in Scuttletown seem to have some degree of variety. Some of them actually look quite active and interesting rather than just being samey NPCs standing around doing nothing. And the hints and dialogue you can get from them have a nice tendency to give you a bit of a chuckle. Speaking of which, this game's dialogue in general is also really good. Obviously, most of it comes from Shantae, but the colourful cast of characters she comes into contact with also get their fair share, and you can get a feel for each character's personality as they speak. Supporting characters such as Uncle Mimic, Sky, Bolo and Rottytops all have enough dialogue to give plenty of insight into their characters, and even the game's 3 minor antagonists, the Squid Baron, the Ammo Baron and the Hypno Baron, all get a fair amount of development, in particular Squid Baron for reasons I'm not going to explain because, again, spoilers. There's also a certain sense of humour to it that always knows how to make you giggle in some way or another, whilst at the same time being serious enough when it needs to be to keep the plot going. Another thing which I really like about this game is the graphics. As you can most likely see, they follow a 16-bit 8-bit style, which gives the game a little bit of retro charm as well. And when you take this art style into consideration, the sprite animations are also really nice to look at from a technical standpoint, so as a result the game's really quite easy on the eye. As for the music, well, it does its job of setting the scene pretty well, whilst at the same time also being really quite enjoyable to listen to. It's riveting when it needs to be, it's calming when it needs to be, it introduces characters' personalities when it needs to, and all the tracks are pretty cracking melodies too, as you can probably tell from hearing them in the background of this video. There is, however, one major criticism I have to make about this game, and that is the teleport system. The way it works is that there are 6 teleport points throughout the game's overworld in pairs of 2. You can only warp from one of each pair to the other, which does make for some quite cumbersome journeys across the game's map to get to the right teleporter for the right location. I also encountered a rather bizarre glitch late into the game, where after a conversation the game seemed to sort of forget where the dialogue was, showing me a strange error message where there should have been dialogue. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to replicate it, so you'll just have to take my word on that one. Anyway, as I said earlier, the game was re-released for other consoles as a Director's Cut version, which boasts new features such as updated HD character portraits and conversations, a new magic mode, which gives you a new character sprite and more magic but less health, and a new teleport system. Other than that though, it's sadly mostly a straight port of the DSi version, and as a result, some of the features of that version haven't exactly translated all that well. Do bear in mind though that I'm only using the PC version for comparison, and features across versions might differ. In the DS version, as mentioned above, you can use the touchscreen for inventory management and viewing the map, but to access the same features in the PC version, you have to push Select if you're using a controller, or A with a keyboard to bring up a whole different game screen for these features, which I feel is just a wee bit more cumbersome, especially in areas like the Battle Tower where I frequently had to change my items to stay alive. Another gripe I had with the PC version is that while the controls are mappable, it's not implemented as well as it could have been. The base programming for the controls seems to be again lifted straight from the DSi version. As a result, the control layout has the same relative positioning as that version. Where the B button is on an Xbox controller, the only kind of controller this game works with incidentally, is where the A button is on a DSi or 3DS. As a result, with the default configuration you use B to progress text and choose menu options, whilst A is relegated solely to jumping, which to me is a little bit counterintuitive for those who are used to this sort of game. Also yes, I tried, and no, you cannot map jump and confirm select to the same button. Furthermore, the game's not too well optimized for widescreen displays. You can choose to display the game in 3 different screen settings. Original, which puts the entire game in a tiny box in the middle of the screen. Full, which increases the game size to your monitor's height and a proportionate 4x3 width. This is possibly the best resolution option. And Stretch, which as the name suggests, stretches the game to your screen resolution and looks absolutely dreadful. On the other hand, the new teleport system, which lets you teleport freely between the different teleport points, is a very welcome addition, as it saves you from a lot of traipsing through the same places back and forth in order to complete your objectives. In all versions, the game's also quite short, clocking in at about 6 hours, but even so, all 6 of those hours are challenging, enjoyable, and filled with a cast of likeable characters, witty dialogue, kick-in music, and a final boss that will wrap the whole thing up in a neat little enjoyable parcel to keep you very much sated. As such, I can most definitely say that Shantae Risky's Revenge is a game worth playing, but if you can, I'd probably say get the DSiWare version over the other versions. Even though, like all DS and DSiWare games, it looks a little blurry on a 3DS and it doesn't have magic mode or the improved teleport, it feels like a slightly nicer fit with the more solid and intuitive controls, touchscreen features, and having the advantage of being portable. But if you don't own a DSi or 3DS, want more of a challenge, are looking to do multiple playthroughs for speedrunning purposes, or can't be bothered with the iffy teleport system, then the Director's Cut is the version for you. But even so, no matter which version you do pick, when it gets right down to it, they're just 2 different versions of one stellar game which I can most definitely recommend. And at £6.99 or $9.99 on Steam and for the Wii U version, and £10.79 or $11.99 for the DSiWare version, it's not a particularly expensive one either. Though if you want the handheld version, you may want to wait for a sale, or if you're feeling really cheap, you can buy the iOS version, which is a mere £2.29 or $3. Now onto the second game of this review, Shantae and the Pirate's Curse. Taking place after the events of Risky's Revenge, Shantae, who at the end of the previous game lost her genie magic in circumstances which this game takes considerable care not to actually reveal, now has to team up with her former nemesis Risky Boots to prevent the resurrection of the Pirate Master, a tyrannical pirate warrior who seeks to return to the world of the living. In addition, the Pirate Master has started using dark magic to turn Risky's Tinkerbats into Cacklebats, horrifying mutated creatures which Shantae must defeat in order to cut off his source of dark magic. I think the plot here is actually much easier to follow follow than in the previous game. Whereas Risky's Revenge's plot is at times quite thin, in this game it doesn't feel thin at all. There always seems to be something interesting going on, and in general it's much better. Gameplay-wise, it's still a Metroidvania platformer, but the areas you explore have expanded quite a bit. Rather than just Scuttletown and the nearby areas, you have a multitude of different islands to explore, from the tropical Saliva Island to the zombie-infested Spiderweb Island and the icy Frostbite Island, which gives it much more variety with regards to the areas you explore and visit. Scuttletown and the surrounding areas have shrunk massively since the first game, though in all honesty, this is more to the game's overall benefit since it cuts out a lot of the needless traipsing back and forth that the first game had. Because of the way in which it's been redesigned, it's also much easier to find your way around Scuttletown, since all the buildings are now clearly labelled, so you no longer have to guess which door contains what. The multiple islands also help to mitigate the Metroidvania forgetting where you're up to problem by giving you much more of a sense of progression as you unlock the islands and defeat the cacklebats found there. The number of undiscovered cacklebats and heart squids, which you use to increase the size of your life bar, are also shown above each island in the hub screen, thus making the completion aspect of the game much more accessible too. The base gameplay and graphics are very similar to that of Risky's Revenge, with a few notable differences. In this installment, Shantae is by default able to whip her hair back and forth much faster than before, and as a result the action is much less rigid and more snappy and satisfying from the get-go. WayForward also added Castlevania-style knockback, which is both a blessing and a curse, since it allows the action to flow a bit more, but on occasion it can be very irritating. One thing that's unfortunately missing is the dancing mechanic due to Shantae having lost her genie powers, but replacing it is a new mechanic in the form of pirate equipment that can be found throughout the levels. For instance, a pistol that allows you to hit far-off switches and serves as a weak ranged attack, a pirate hat which serves as a parachute, allowing you to glide long distances and ride updrafts, and a cutlass which lets you do a ground pound attack. These complement the Metroidvania gameplay much like the dances did in the previous game, and arguably even do a better job, since there's more of them and they allow for more variety in the platforming puzzles than the dances did. Not only that, but WayForward have also, it seems, managed to add a couple of new spins on the platforming too, with gameplay drastically changing in a couple of sections of the game as you play. One section sees you unable to attack, running through monster-infested woods, and another is a Wind Waker-esque stealth section in which you're stripped of all your items and have to try to sneak out of the area. If you're detected by the guards, they will march you back to the start. These serve as interesting, fun little breaks from the Metroidvania gameplay and keep the game interesting in a way that doesn't disturb the flow of the plot in any serious way. And before you ask, yes, that outfit is the same one as the one that Shantae wears when in magic mode in Risky's Revenge Director's Cut. One rather drastic change from the previous game is the item system, which has been almost completely overhauled. Most of the magic from Risky's Revenge is understandably gone, and the mana system has been replaced with time-limited single-use items. You're no longer able to hot switch between different items in quite the same way as in Risky's Revenge, but what you can do is use multiple items at the same time, a feature which the previous game quite notably lacked. The overall range of items available to buy is also wider, and you no longer need to find Magic Jam to buy anything. Alongside standard offensive items and attack buffs, there's Fighter's Moves, which are extra maneuvers you can perform in combat, some of which can come in particularly handy, and a massive, very variable and on occasion slightly humorous range of healing items, including the all-new Auto Potion, which activates as soon as you run out of health, and believe me, that will save your bacon on many an occasion. I found myself not using items quite as often as I did in Risky's Revenge, but honestly there's nothing wrong at all with the new system. It's certainly different, but it doesn't really detract from the experience at all, and it's just as fun to use as the old system. A lot of the characters from Risky's Revenge also reappear in Pirate's Curse, as do some new characters, major and minor, ranging from a new Baron to a walking He-Man parody, and they're all just as funny and interesting as they were before, perhaps even more so. You get to see a lot more of the other characters than in Risky's Revenge, and you'll learn more about them as you progress through the game, and you'll be glad to know that the fantastic writing also makes a return, and in greater and even more humorous amounts. Sometimes it'll have you on the edge of your seat, and other times every other line will have you giggling. Heck, even signs and some item descriptions contain their fair share of weird and wacky humour. All that, and somehow you never really lose track of the plot. Suffice to say, this game's writing is top-notch. Also back with a vengeance in this game is the music. A fair amount of the soundtrack is made up of remixed tracks from Risky's Revenge, but most of them are original, and whereas its predecessor's soundtrack was pretty good, Pirate's Curse ramps that description up to frickin' fantastic. Every single track on this soundtrack is even more riveting than in the previous installment, and in general, it seems to have much more thump to it than before. As a result, it perfectly complements the action-rich gameplay and awesomely written characters, and not only that, but whilst it does sound modern and upbeat, some of the songs seem seem to remind slightly of its 16-bit forefathers. If you listen to them in just the right way, they do sound a bit like remixes of songs from the days of the SNES era. I honestly sort of regret that I can't fit more songs from this game's soundtrack into this video. It really is that much of a joy to listen to. Another thing which this game has, which Risky's Revenge doesn't, is voice acting for some of Shantae's lines, provided by none other than Christina V, who also played such high-profile roles as Homura Akemi from Madoka Magica, Compa from Hyperdimension Neptunia, and Riven from League of Legends. Whilst at times the voice acting can be a teensy bit grating, it certainly helps to build up Shantae's character a little more by putting more of a voice in her mouth, and overall Christina V's performance is pretty good. That said, it is a bit of a shame that WayForward didn't choose to go big and fully voice act it, because that would have been downright awesome. From a technical standpoint, Pirate's Curse is also a vast improvement over Risky's Revenge on all platforms. The 16-bit graphic style, and indeed some of the sprites, make a triumphant return and are as well animated and charming as ever, and the 3DS version retains the touchscreen item and map features and expands on it by splitting consumable and key items and allowing you to navigate the menu with the Circle Pad Pro or the new 3DS's C-Stick if you have either of those, which adds an interesting, possibly even more streamlined way of navigating these menus. It's very clear to see that WayForward put a lot more thought into the versions for other consoles than with Risky's Revenge, as there are also numerous improvements to be seen on the non-DS consoles too. For instance, the PC version of the game actually supports higher resolutions properly and seems to be much more intuitively designed, especially in terms of the controls, which now no longer interfere with the menu controls despite no longer being fully mappable. It's also got a much wider field of view, allowing for more action to be seen on screen and more enemies and areas to be visible at one time. You do still have to bring up the menu with a separate button to use items and view the map, though it's much less of a faff than in Risky's Revenge due to not having to remember which button does what in different menus. The menus themselves also look much nicer and much less hastily designed than the ones seen in Risky's Revenge Director's Cut. Pirate's Curse is also a tad longer than Risky's Revenge, weighing in about 8 to 10 hours give or take, which for a game of its price is pretty meaty. But again, unlike the prior game, there are two possible endings to see depending on whether or not you completed certain objectives, which gives an extra incentive to explore and discover everything the game's world has to offer, so in the long run, you might end up spending more time than you expect with this game. All things considered, Shantae and the Pirate's Curse is not just a massive improvement on Risky's Revenge and a great sequel to a great game, but also a truly fantastic game in its own right. The gameplay is smooth and enjoyable, the soundtrack is wonderful, the dialogue is stellar, the 16-bit graphics once again give it a fair amount of charm, and for what it's worth I can say that even on its own, it's one of the best platformers I've ever played, and certainly one of my favourite games of all time. It's priced at $14.99 on Steam, and $15.99 on the eShop, Xbox Live and PlayStation Store. Alternatively, if you own an Amazon Fire Stick, there's a version available for that for just over £13. If you live in America, it's $19.99 across all systems. Soon to come in September as well is another game, Shantae Half-Genie Hero, which will feature a new art style, the return of the dancing mechanic with all new transformations and abilities, and in a first for the series, the ability to play as other characters, said other characters being Risky, Sky, Rottitops and Bolo. This looks like it's going to be a pretty fun installment too, and the new art style in particular looks like a quite interesting change of pace for the series, and one which I'll be very much looking forward to. If you'd like to download the soundtracks of either of the games I've reviewed in this video, or Dance Through the Danger, the song that's playing right now, they're all completely free to download, and there should now be some links on screen from which you can download them. They can also be found in the video description. Before we finish, I'd like to give extra special thanks to WayForward themselves for being so kind as to provide me with a review key for the Pirate's Curse. Seriously, thank you guys so much. I love you and the games you make, and I just cannot wait for Half-Genie Hero. I've been Deuterium the Sentient Mattress, and this has been my review of most of the Shantae series. Thank you very much for joining me, and see you next time. Some older gamers among you may be familiar. I put accent on the wrong syllable. Wii U and PlayStation 4 as a director's cut reversion. Reversion? What's a reversion? Definitely not what I'm talking about. Also present is a standard item system but no matter which version you pick. The 6-bean dick, oh god. And another sees you stripped of all your items whilst you try to stealthily